I have documented a psychological pattern so disturbing that I consider it among the most challenging transformations I have witnessed in human nature. Across multiple cases, I have observed patients, especially those of an empathic nature, who seemed gentle and broken until something inside them snapped. I have come to call them the awakened ones. These individuals who embodied my concepts of shadow integration changed not just their own lives, but revolutionized our understanding of human psychology. I spent decades studying what mirrored the principles of shadow work in empathic individuals. What I discovered continues to unsettle psychologists to this day. The kindest people are not weak. Their weapons are waiting to be forged. My case files from the Zurich clinic reveal a disturbing pattern. Patient after patient arrived carrying the same wounds. Empaths who had been systematically destroyed by those who claimed to love them. They came with bruises they explained away. They came with depression. They blamed it on themselves and a universal tendency to apologize for existing. I documented what I saw across dozens of these cases. These individuals had spent their lives absorbing everyone else's pain, alcoholic parents' rage, spouses' infidelity, family members' dysfunction. They were what I call the emotional shock absorbers of their social systems. They were individuals who exemplified my observations about how sensitive people often become repositories for collective psychological pain. Here is the part that made my blood run cold. These empaths did not just endure abuse, they systematized it. When I asked them to describe their relationships, I expected the scattered thoughts of damaged minds. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about empaths. These patients had not been broken by abuse, they had been studying it. I found that empaths kept detailed mental records of every person who had ever hurt them. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. They had mapped emotional patterns with surgical precision. They had never used this knowledge, not once, until something pushed them past their breaking point. I wrote about how the empath's mind operates not as a victim's diary, but as a strategist's war room, waiting for the moment of activation. I realized I was not treating victims. I was sitting across from psychological geniuses in hiding, individuals whose capabilities reflected my theories about the advanced psychological functions some people develop. These empaths' genius was not in creation, it was in emotional archaeology. They could excavate people's deepest wounds just by watching their micro-expressions. I began testing their abilities. I brought in colleagues without telling these patients anything about them. Within minutes, they could identify childhood traumas, relationship patterns, professional insecurities. Their accuracy rate was consistently remarkable. Here is what made my hands shake as I wrote my notes. These empaths were not psychic, they were simply paying attention at a level most humans never reach. What others call intuition, they call data collection. I started to understand something revolutionary about empaths. They do not just feel more deeply, they process emotional information faster and more accurately than anyone else. Their minds are wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. Society had taught these individuals that this gift was a curse. Every time they tried to voice what they saw, the lies, the manipulation, the hidden agendas, people called them too sensitive or overly emotional. They learned to silence themselves, to doubt their perceptions, to apologize for seeing what others could not. The truth does not disappear just because you stop speaking it. It accumulates, and in these cases, it had been accumulating for decades. I observed how empaths do not lose their mind from feeling too much. They lose their mind from being told their feelings are wrong. I realized these patients were not having nervous breakdowns. They were having breakthroughs. I identified a consistent pattern across my empath cases. Their transformation did not happen gradually. It happened in one explosive moment that reflected what I understood about shadow integration under extreme duress. The trigger was always betrayal, not just any betrayal, but betrayal by someone the empath had completely trusted and protected. In case after case, I documented the same scenario. The empath would discover infidelity, financial betrayal, or emotional manipulation from their closest person. What made it devastating was not the act itself. It was the realization that they had seen the signs all along and ignored them. These patients did what empaths do. They said nothing. They absorbed the pain in silence. They blamed themselves. They tried harder to be perfect partners, children, or friends. Then came the moment that changed everything, the clarity event, when the empath's pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their need to believe the best in people, embodying my concepts about psychological awakening. Most people would expect empaths to cry, to scream, to fall apart. Their abusers expected that too. They were prepared for emotional chaos. What happened instead was something that terrified everyone involved. The empaths became unnaturally calm. I documented this as the moment when someone finally integrates their analytical capabilities with their emotional intelligence. I observed across multiple cases what I would describe as the most chilling psychological transformation possible. These empaths did not attack, they did not rage. They simply began to speak truth. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured, not with cruelty, but with clinical precision, like surgeons identifying each diseased organ before removing it. This was not revenge, it was clarity. These empaths were finally using their gift of complete perception, not to excuse behavior, but to expose it. My observations echoed the ancient wisdom that there is no fury like someone who has finally learned to trust their own perceptions. I realized this pattern across my cases was not revenge. This was what I termed shadow integration. The moment when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. The empath shadow was not evil, it was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. When they finally integrated these aspects of themselves, they became what I called psychologically complete. Here is what made these cases so disturbing for me. The transformation was permanent. These patients did not cycle back into people-pleasing. They did not apologize for their newfound boundaries. They did not second-guess their perceptions anymore. They had become what I observed with great interest, empaths who could no longer be manipulated. The changes did not stop at the psychological level. I documented how these individuals' entire lives transformed within months. They left abusive relationships with strategic precision. They cut contact with toxic family members without emotional drama. They rebuilt their lives on their own terms. I observed them becoming selectively empathetic, still deeply caring but strategically protective of where that care flowed. The most disturbing part for me was how these transformed empaths' presence affected others. People who had once walked all over them suddenly felt nervous around them. They could not explain why. These empaths were not aggressive or cruel, but everyone sensed something had fundamentally changed. I identified what I called the predator's instinct. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics will not work. They avoid integrated empaths instinctively. I wrote, "The awakened empath does not need to announce their power. Others can feel it in their bones." My fascination with these empath cases went beyond professional interest. I was disturbed because I recognized something in their transformation, something that mirrored my own psychological development. I myself was a highly sensitive person. I understood the empath's journey from the inside. I knew the pain of seeing what others could not see, feeling what others would not feel. These cases forced me to confront a disturbing question. What happens when empaths stop being society's emotional shock absorbers and start using their gifts strategically? I spent years following these transformed patients' post-integration lives. What I discovered kept me awake at night. These individuals had become extraordinarily successful. Their businesses thrived because they could read clients' real needs before they voiced them. Their new relationships were healthy because they could identify emotional predators within minutes. Their decisions were flawless because they trusted their intuitive intelligence completely. I realized something that made my blood run cold. These empaths had not become less empathetic. They had become perfectly empathetic, which meant they were also perfectly strategic. They could manipulate others as easily as they had once been manipulated. They understood human psychology at a level that made them remarkably potent in social situations. Here is what truly terrified me. These transformed empaths chose not to use this power destructively. They could have destroyed every person who had ever hurt them. Instead, they simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. I realized I had witnessed the birth of what I called the integrated empath, someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserved their energy. My private notes reveal my amazement. I have observed something beautiful and terrible. These individuals have become what every manipulator fears most, someone who can see through them completely, but no longer needs anything from them. These empath transformations did not happen in isolation. I documented how their changes affected every system they had been part of. Family dynamics collapsed, not because these individuals destroyed them, but because they stopped enabling dysfunction. Alcoholic family members were forced to face their addictions without empaths as emotional dumping grounds. Depressed relatives had to find other sources of validation. Manipulative siblings could no longer use these transformed empaths as psychological punching bags. Here is what made me realize how powerful awakened empaths truly are. Their transformation forced everyone around them to evolve or reveal their true nature. The healthy people in their lives grew stronger from their example. The toxic people exposed themselves through desperate attempts to pull these empaths back into old patterns. I observed what I call the empath's mirror effect. These transformed individuals did not have to actively confront people's dysfunction anymore. Their mere presence reflected issues back with uncomfortable clarity. Manipulators could not stand to be around them. They felt exposed, seen through, unable to operate their usual psychological games. Meanwhile, authentic people felt safe with these empaths for the first time. My research showed that awakened empaths become living truth detectors, not through judgment, but through presence. The most disturbing discovery came when I introduced these transformed patients to others in my practice. Within minutes, they could identify core psychological wounds and the exact type of therapy needed. I realized these empaths' diagnostic accuracy surpassed my own decades of training. This created an ethical dilemma that haunted me for years. If empaths could develop this level of psychological insight, what did that mean for the future of psychology itself? I began quietly studying other empaths in my practice, developing an integration observation protocol, a framework for understanding how this transformation occurs naturally. This framework was not therapy in the traditional sense. It was psychological documentation of how empaths naturally developed a warrior consciousness after severe betrayal. I identified consistent stages across my cases. The first stage, recognition. Empaths learn to identify their suppressed shadow aspects, not just their anger, but their intelligence, their strength, their right to boundaries. These individuals stopped pathologizing their perceptions and started trusting their emotional intelligence as the sophisticated data processing system it actually was. The second stage proved more intense, integration. I watched empaths merge their light and shadow aspects into what I termed the complete self. They became people who could be incredibly kind to those who deserved it and ruthlessly precise with those who did not. The third stage, application. This was what I found most fascinating. Integrated empaths learn to use their emotional intelligence strategically, not just defensively. They became psychological architects, people who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with remarkable precision. I realized these transformed empaths could no longer be victimized because they saw manipulation coming from miles away and neutralized it before it could take root. These individuals did not just heal themselves, they became immune to psychological abuse while maintaining their capacity for genuine love and connection. My private notes reveal my amazement. I have observed the development of compassion paired with wisdom. These individuals are now among the most psychologically powerful people I have ever encountered. The final stage was what I understood as the natural return to service. Integrated empaths did not become cold or disconnected. They became selectively generous with their gifts. They used their abilities to help other empaths transform, creating what I documented as a network of psychologically resilient individuals. My work with these empath cases created ripple effects that continue to this day. I realized that empaths were not mentally ill. They were evolutionarily advanced individuals living in systems designed to exploit their gifts. I began seeing empathic sensitivity not as a disorder to be cured, but as a psychological capability to be properly understood and protected. I also recognized something concerning. In the wrong circumstances, these abilities could be devastating. An empath who integrated their shadow without proper ethical grounding could become extremely manipulative. I developed an ethical integration model, documenting how awakened empaths naturally used their powers for healing rather than harm. My case files on these transformations remained among my most closely guarded research. I knew that if the wrong people learned how to deliberately trigger empath transformation, it could be weaponized. I scattered my observations across multiple private journals, never publishing the complete findings during my lifetime. My final notes on these cases reveal something beautiful. These individuals lived the rest of their lives as balanced warriors, people capable of incredible gentleness with those who earned it and implacable strength against those who threatened it. They became templates for what I believed was humanity's next evolutionary step. People who could feel everything without being destroyed by it, see everything without becoming cynical, and love deeply without losing themselves. My last observation about these transformed empaths, written near the end of my career, they proved that the empath's journey is not from sensitivity to numbness, but from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They became not less empathetic, but perfectly empathetic. I leave one final insight for future psychologists. Never underestimate someone who has learned to trust their own perceptions completely. The awakened empath represents psychology's most powerful evolution. My observations about awakened empaths proved prophetic in ways even I could not have imagined. The research confirms what my cases demonstrated. Empaths who undergo shadow integration become psychologically invincible. They can no longer be gaslighted because they trust their perceptions absolutely. They cannot be manipulated because they see emotional games before they are fully formed. They cannot be broken because they have already been to the bottom and emerged stronger. Here is what makes my case studies eternally relevant. Every empath will face their transformation moment. The betrayal so profound it forces them to choose between remaining a victim or becoming sovereign. The question is not whether the empath will snap, it is whether they will integrate their shadow consciously like my documented cases or let it consume them destructively. My research revealed that most empaths, when pushed to their breaking point, choose integration. They do not become cruel, they become precise. They do not lose their hearts, they gain backbones. The transformed empath becomes what I called with boundaries, someone who can care deeply while protecting themselves. My final insight about these cases still resonates through psychology circles today. These individuals did not become different people. They became who they always were beneath the conditioning. Every empath carries within them the potential to become psychologically untouchable. It just takes the right catalyst, usually betrayal, to force that transformation. I wrote, the empath's greatest tragedy is not their sensitivity, it is how long they wait to honor it properly. Remember where we started, my documentation of a psychological pattern so disturbing I called it the most terrifying transformation in human nature. These were not isolated cases, they represented a fundamental truth about empathic psychology. My research revealed something that still makes psychologists uncomfortable. Empaths are not naturally victims, they are naturally powerful. Society just teaches them to suppress that power in the name of being acceptable. When empaths finally snap, they are not breaking. They are awakening to abilities they possessed all along. My case files reveal the truth that manipulators do not want you to know. The kindest people are often the strongest people because kindness without strength enables dysfunction. The awakened empaths I documented represent evolution in action, individuals who can feel everything and choose everything with complete consciousness. I spent decades studying patients who seemed gentle and broken until something inside them snapped. My research proved that the empath's journey is not about becoming less sensitive, it is about becoming consciously sensitive. And consciousness, I realized, is what transforms victims into forces of nature. The most beautiful part of my findings, these transformed empaths never lost their capacity for love. They just learned to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. If you are an empath reading this, remember my essential discovery. Your sensitivity is not your weakness, it is your weapon. And the day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly powerful. Not dangerous to innocent people, but dangerous to those who would exploit your gifts. That is exactly what the world needs more of. Empaths who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light for anyone's comfort. My research left us with this question, not whether empaths will transform, but whether they will do it consciously or let life force it upon them.